The Florida sun, usually a welcome golden embrace, felt strangely oppressive as the moving truck pulled away from 142 Evergreen Lane. Sarah, trying to project optimism, squeezed her husband John's hand. "See? Perfect. Pleasantville lives up to its name." John, ever the practical one, nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Their kids, Emma, 10, and Ethan, 7, were already tearing through the manicured backyard, shrieking with delight at the pristine green expanse. This was their fresh start, a move away from the city's frantic pace, a chance to embrace suburban tranquility. The quaint house with its cheerful yellow siding and white picket fence seemed to hum with an almost idyllic energy. Their initial delight was, however, punctuated by a peculiar discovery. Scattered strategically across the immaculately kept lawn were dozens of porcelain garden gnomes. Not the cute, rosy-cheeked kind, but older, almost weathered figures with stern, watchful eyes and pointed red hats. They were everywhere, peeking from flower beds lined up along the stone path, even nestled beneath the sprawling oak tree. John laughed, calling them yard protectors, a quirky remnant from the previous owners. Sarah found them a little unsettling. Their painted smiles too wide, their stone gazes too intense. She made a mental note to clear them out eventually, once they settled in. The first week was a whirlwind of unpacking boxes and settling into routines. One morning, Sarah noticed something odd. The gnome that usually sat by the mailbox seemed a few inches closer to the porch. She brushed it off as John having moved it, but he denied it. The next day, the gnome by the rose bush, previously facing the street, was now turned to face the house, its painted eyes fixed on the living room window. A prickle of unease ran down her spine, a whisper of irrationality she quickly suppressed. It was just the subtle shifting of things, an adjustment to a new home. Emma and Ethan, however, seemed fascinated by them. Emma claimed the gnomes talked to her at night, soft murmurs carried on the breeze. Ethan, on the other hand, was convinced they played games, leaving him small. Polished stones or brightly colored leaves on his windowsill. John scoffed at their imaginations, attributing it to the novelty of a new environment. "It's just the wind, kids, or maybe some squirrels," he'd say. But even he couldn't explain the perfectly arranged pine cones that appeared on the patio every morning. The strangeness escalated. One evening, after a particularly frustrating attempt to get the lawnmower working, John muttered a dismissive curse at a gnome near the shed. The next morning, the lawnmower was found disassembled, its parts neatly laid out, but with key components missing. A faint, earthy smell like overturned soil permeated the air around the gnome. John, baffled, blamed mischievous teenagers, despite the impenetrable fence and the suburban quiet. Sarah, however, felt a cold dread begin to seep in, a feeling that these were not mere decorations. As the summer wore on, the gnomes seemed to multiply. New ones, identical to the originals, would appear overnight in previously empty spots. One morning, Emma pointed out that the gnomes lining the driveway were now visibly taller. "They're growing, Mom," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of awe and trepidation. Sarah measured them discreetly. Indeed, they were, by almost an inch. John, attributing it to an optical illusion or simple forgetfulness, still dismissed her growing concerns, his denial a flimsy shield against the unsettling reality. One sweltering afternoon, John, tired of their silent judgment, decided to move a particularly stern-looking gnome that sat by the pool. As he lifted it, the porcelain felt unnervingly warm, almost alive, and a faint, high-pitched whine seemed to even emanate from it, chilling him to the bone. He dropped it with a yelp, shattering its hat. A silence descended on the neighborhood, thick and heavy. The other gnomes, seemingly unmoving, felt as if their collective gaze had sharpened, their painted smiles stretching into something predatory. That night, a series of unsettling events unfolded. Ethan woke up screaming from a nightmare, claiming a gnome had stood at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing red. Emma's favorite doll, left on the porch, was found meticulously dismembered on the doorstep, its stuffing pulled out to form. A crude, unsettling symbol on the welcome mat. And from outside, a rhythmic tapping sound began, soft at first, then growing louder, like tiny stone mallets striking the foundation of the house. A persistent, insistent demand. John, finally, shaken, grabbed the flashlight and peered out the window. Dozens of gnomes, far more than they owned, seemed to have materialized in the yard, their backs to the house, facing the street. Their hats, usually red, glowed with a faint, malevolent crimson light. A chilling whisper slithered under the closed windows, a collective sibilant chant that seemed to resonate with the rhythmic tapping. Offer, give, protect. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old, dried blood. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting the suburban street in a sickly, unnatural glow, the rhythmic tapping ceased. The red glow from the gnomes' hats faded, but they remained unmoving, their gazes now fixed on the miller's house. A new unsettling filled the air, heavier than before, pregnant with expectation. And on the doorstep, carefully placed, beside the dismembered doll, was a small, crudely carved wooden figurine, unmistakably a child, its eyes gouged out. The gnomes, Sarah realized with a sickening lurch, weren't just growing. They were demanding a price. The morning after the unsettling discovery of the wooden figurine, a palpable tension hung heavy in the Miller household. John, his face ashen, finally admitted his fear, his practical nature shattered. Sarah frantically Googled Pleasantville history, finding only saccharine community pages and real estate listings touting its unparalleled charm. There was no mention of gnomes, no local legends, no explanation for the chilling events of the night. It was as if Pleasantville itself was perfectly curated to hide its monstrous truth, its pleasant facade a thin veil over something ancient and hungry. Their attempts to rationalize the events, to dismiss them as pranks or collective hysteria, were futile. The gnomes were undeniably more numerous, and a few now stood ominously close to the house, their painted smiles seeming to stretch wider, their eyes darker. Their original sizes seemed almost endearing compared to the new, unsettling growth. Sarah tried calling friends, but the calls dropped repeatedly, riddled with static that sounded suspiciously like distorted whispers. The internet connection flickered in and out, offering only error messages when she tried to search for anything beyond Pleasantville's sanitized history. They were isolated, truly cut off, trapped in their perfect suburban nightmare dot as the sun climbed higher, casting the property in a deceptive golden light. A new sound emerged, a faint, incessant humming that seemed to emanate from the ground. Itself, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the collective drone of thousands of unseen insects, yet it felt like something far older, far more purposeful. Emma and Ethan, unusually quiet, clung to Sarah, their eyes wide with fear. Ethan pointed to the gnomes by the back porch. "They're watching us eat, Mom," he whispered, his small voice trembling. Panic began to set in. John tried to remove the gnomes, grabbing a shovel with trembling hands. As he approached the nearest one, its painted eyes glowed with a faint red light, and a chorus of high-pitched metallic chimes erupted from the entire collection, impossibly loud and piercing. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, and thorny vines, thicker and faster than any normal growth, erupted from the soil around the gnomes, snaking towards him, attempting to ensnare his legs. He dropped the shovel, scrambling back to the house, his face pale with horror. The gnomes were not just ceramic. They were connected, alive, and fiercely territorial. The second night in Pleasantville plunged them deeper into terror. The humming from the earth intensified, and the rhythmic tapping on the foundation returned, now accompanied by a faint, scratching sound from within the walls, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. The garden gnomes, dozens of them, now stood in perfect, silent formation around the house, their red hats glowing with an almost malevolent intensity. Their painted smiles seemed to widen in the darkness, and their gazes, fixed on the windows, held an unsettling, ancient hunger. The psychological toll on the family was devastating. John retreated into a shell of terrified silence, his eyes darting frantically in every shadow. Sarah, despite her own escalating fear, fought to remain strong for the children, but her forced calm frayed with each passing hour. Emma began to draw disturbing pictures, stick figures surrounded by towering, red-eyed gnomes. Ethan, meanwhile, would simply stare blankly at the gnomes outside, sometimes giggling softly, as if sharing a secret joke with them, his innocence slowly eroding. One afternoon, while Sarah was trying to calm the children, their cat, Whiskers, who had been unnervingly agitated since their arrival, darted into the backyard. A sudden piercing shriek tore through the air, followed by a sickening crunch. When John dared to look, Whisker's favorite toy mouse lay mangled on the lawn, and a small ceramic gnome, one they hadn't seen before, stood triumphantly over it, its hands clasped around a tiny bloodied bird, an offering laid before the largest, most ancient-looking gnome near the oak tree. Desperate for answers, Sarah stumbled upon a forgotten local history book in an old box, an unofficial publication about Pleasantville. It detailed the town's founding on ancient tribal lands, a place revered for its fertility, but also feared for its earth spirits, guardians who demanded a tribute to maintain the land's prosperity. The book spoke of a forgotten covenant of stone made by the early settlers to appease these spirits after a devastating blight. A covenant sealed by a horrific sacrifice and maintained through offerings. The garden gnomes, she realized with a sickening jolt, were not merely decorations. They were the physical embodiment of these ancient, insatiable earth spirits. That night, John, fueled by a desperate surge of protective fury, gathered there. Few remaining tools. He would burn them, smash them, anything to break their hold. He doused a dozen gnomes in gasoline, a grim determination hardening his face. As he lit the match, the gnomes collectively roared, a sound of ancient, stone-like anger that vibrated the very foundations of the house. The ground began to tremor violently, and from beneath the lawn, monstrous, thorny vines erupted, grasping and writhing like 100 hungry serpents, encircling the house, cutting off any chance of escape. The fire, instead of consuming the gnomes, seemed to feed them. The flames turned an unnatural green, flickering around the porcelain figures as they swelled, growing monstrously large, their painted smiles cracking into gaping maws. The ground outside glowed with a sickly green light, and the humming intensified, now a guttural chant of mine, all mine. The gnomes, now twice their original size, began to press against the windows, their stone hands leaving icy imprints on the glass, their faces distorted into grotesque, leering visages. Emma and Ethan, huddled in the corner, began to hum the gnomes' chilling chant, their eyes wide and vacant, their innocent faces reflecting the green light with an unnatural glow. The grotesque transformation of the gnomes was a punch to the gut, a final crushing blow to any lingering hope of normalcy. The humming chant of menial mine resonated not just from outside, but from deep within the very walls of the house. A constant sickening thrum that vibrated through their bones. John stood paralyzed, his fury replaced by a profound, soul-numbing despair. Sarah, clutching Emma and Ethan, felt their small bodies tremble, their soft humming a chilling echo of the gnome's malevolent song. The perfect suburban dream had become a living, breathing nightmare, and they were trapped, truly trapped, with no escape. The house itself seemed to twist and groan, succumbing to the malevolent influence. Doors jammed, windows warped, and the once cheerful yellow paint began to peel and blister, revealing dark, wet patches beneath that writhed with faint green bioluminescence. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth, decay, and the cloying sweetness of wilting flowers, the scent of ancient blood. The whispers from the gnomes outside intensified, forming coherent, mocking phrases that spoke of the gift, of the sacrifice, and of the joining. Their isolation was absolute. The phone lines were dead, the internet a mere ghost, and the car's engine simply clicked uselessly, refusing to turn over. The thorny vines, now thick as tree trunks, had formed an impenetrable living wall around. The entire property, their thorns razor sharp, their tendrils occasionally brushing against the windows, leaving faint, bloody streaks. The vibrant, manicured lawn now seemed to pulse with the same sickly green light as the gnomes, its blades of grass strangely elongated, almost hair-like, reaching towards the house. Nightfall brought a fresh wave of terror. The moonlight, usually a comforting glow, was swallowed by the oppressive green light emanating from the gnomes and the lawn, casting their living room in a ghostly, unsettling pallor. The rhythmic tapping on the foundation intensified, echoing through the house, becoming a relentless, torturous drumbeat that seemed to accelerate their very heartbeats. The shadows inside danced with malevolent glee, stretching and twisting into grotesque, fleeting figures that seemed to mimic the gnomes outside, their silent smiles leering from every corner. The psychological fracturing of the family became terrifyingly evident. John, consumed by guilt and terror, began to scream at unseen figures, convinced the gnomes were inside, taunting him. Sarah fought to maintain a semblance of control, but her hands shook uncontrollably, and she started seeing flickering faces in the gnomes' stone eyes, pleading, agonizing visages that seemed to beg for release. Emma and Ethan, however, were undergoing the most chilling transformation. Their humming grew louder, a perfectly harmonized, eerie counterpoint to the gnomes' chant, and their eyes, once innocent, held a vacant green glow, as if the gnomes' light had seeped into their very souls. As Sarah tried to shake Emma out of her trance-like state, a sudden violent tremor rocked the house. A section of the living room wall cracked open, revealing not plaster and studs, but rich, dark soil, pulsating with a faint green light, intertwined with thick, gnarled roots. From the opening, a smaller, darker gnome, unlike any they had seen, slowly emerged, its ceramic cracked and filled with weeping fissures that oozed a viscous green sap. It was ancient, its painted smile chipped, yet its eyes, glowing with an intense emerald fire, held an intelligent, terrifying malice. Clutched in the smaller gnome's hand was a bundle of desiccated, parchment-like scrolls. With trembling hands, Sarah unfolded them. They were the true covenant of stone, not a simple agreement, but a blood pact between the early settlers of Pleasantville and the earth spirits, the gnomes. The covenant demanded eternal sustenance for the land's prosperity, a yearly offering of innocent life to ensure the perpetual fertility of the soil. The previous owners, she realized with a sickening horror, had simply passed on their gruesome duty, and the gnomes were here to collect. The true source of the horror was revealed. The gnomes were not merely spirits. They were the vessels of the land itself, ancient earth elementals bound by a dark pact, feeding on the life force of those who lived upon it. The fertility of Pleasantville, its vibrant lawns and abundant gardens, was directly tied to the gruesome sacrifices made. Through generations, the previous owners, she surmised, had escaped or died before their final obligation. And now the gnomes, starved and enraged, were here to claim their due from the new inhabitants. John, shaking off his despair, grabbed the heavy antique lamp. "We have to fight them," he croaked, his voice raw with fear. Sarah pointed to the scrolls. "We have to break the covenant." Their desperate attempt to fight or to sever the ancient bond only made things worse. As John swung the lamp at the emerging gnome, The roots in the wall lashed out, striking him with brutal force, sending him sprawling. The smaller gnome, undeterred, began to speak, its voice a dry, rasping whisper that resonated directly in their minds, filling them with unspeakable dread. "The bond is unbreakable," it rasped, its eyes burning into Sarah's. "The earth demands its due. You are fertile. Your children are perfect offerings." As it spoke, the thick, thorny vines from the outside began to force their way through. The shattered window panes, their sharp tendrils reaching into the living room, searching, grasping, their tips glowing with the same sickly green light. Emma and Ethan, their eyes now completely vacant, smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile, and extended their small hands towards the thorny vines, beckoning them inwards. The gnomes were not just outside. They were inside, in their children, in their home, and in the very earth beneath them. Despair was a cold, constricting vice around Sarah's heart. John lay sprawled, unconscious, a thorny vine already beginning to wrap around his leg. Emma and Ethan, their eyes glowing with an alien emerald light, giggled, their small hands reaching for the thorny tendrils that snaked into the room. The smaller, ancient gnome stood before them, its voice a dry, sibilant rasp in their minds. "The offering is chosen. The earth demands its due." The walls of their once perfect home pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, the air thick with the cloying scent of blood and rich, damp soil. Every hope of escape, every dream of normalcy, had withered and died. Yet a fierce primal scream of defiance tore through Sarah's throat, not for herself, but for her children. The gnomes wanted a sacrifice, a perpetuation of their ancient, twisted covenant. But what if the covenant could be fulfilled, not by an offering of innocence, but by an offering of vengeance? The scrolls mentioned the first binding, a ritual of sacrifice that imbued the gnomes with their power. Perhaps, she thought, the destruction of the original source of their power, the very land they were bound to, could break the cycle. The house seemed to shudder around them, the roots in the walls growing thicker, the vines outside pressing harder against the foundations. The humming chant of the gnomes outside intensified, now a maddening, guttural roar that threatened to shatter the very glass in the windows. The smaller gnome, sensing her shift in resolve, tilted its head, its eyes burning brighter, anticipating its victory. Its voice echoed in her mind. "Resistance is futile. Join us. Become part of the garden." A searing vision exploded in Sarah's mind. Clearer than any memory, the terrified faces of the early settlers, their hands bound, forced to witness the sacrifice of their loved ones to appease the insatiable earth spirits. She saw the true nature of Pleasantville's prosperity, built on generations of stolen life, a horrifying pact enforced by the grotesque gnomes. The blight was not natural. It was the gnomes' hunger, a warning for the next offering. The covenant wasn't for protection. It was for consumption, a constant bloodthirsty hunger. With a primal scream, Sarah lunged, not at the gnomes, but at the exposed wall, tearing at the roots with her bare hands, pulling at the ancient earth beneath the plaster. "You want to feed?" She shrieked, her voice raw. "Then choke on this." she found an old, brittle pipe running through the earth. With a strength born of desperation, she wrenched it, twisting until it snapped, spraying black, foul-smelling liquid onto the exposed roots and earth. It was raw sewage, corrosive and unnatural. The gnomes shrieked, a sound of unholy agony, a chorus of crumbling stone. A blinding flash of green light erupted from the exposed wall, forcing the gnomes outside to recoil. The thorny vines writhed and withered, turning black and brittle. Emma and Ethan screamed, their eyes snapping back to their normal, terrified selves, the green glow fading. The smaller gnome, consumed by the corrosive liquid, shrieked, its stone body cracking and dissolving into a pile of crumbling dust. The ground outside ceased its humming, its sickening pulse replaced by a silent, guttural gasp, as if the very earth were dying. The house trembled violently, then a profound silence fell, heavier than before, but no longer malevolent. The noxious fumes slowly cleared, revealing a ruined living room, its walls streaked with black slime and withered roots. The gnomes outside lay inert, cracked and broken, their vibrant hats faded to dull red. The perfect lawn was now a sickly brown wasteland, the grass withered and dead. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by the ragged breaths of John, who stirred and moaned, and the soft, terrified sobs of Emma and Ethan. The horror was gone, it seemed, but the scars, physical and psychological, were profound. They stumbled out of the house, leaving behind the decaying ruins of their dream home. The surrounding Pleasantville felt strangely quiet, its perfect lawns now tinged with a faint, unnatural brown, its vibrant flowers subtly wilting. No one questioned their story. They were simply the Millers, the family who had snapped and destroyed their property. They moved away, far away, but the images of the gnomes, their painted smiles, and the chilling chant were seared into their minds, a constant hum beneath the surface of their sanity. Years passed. The Millers tried to rebuild their lives, but the quiet hum of the gnomes never truly left them. Emma and Ethan, though physically unharmed, sometimes hummed the unsettling lullaby of the gnomes in their sleep. Sarah found herself compulsively checking her new garden, a low-grade paranoia, always present. John, haunted by the memory, could never again look at a garden gnome without a shudder. One sunny afternoon, years later, Sarah received an anonymous package. Inside was a small, crudely carved wooden figurine. It was a replica of their new house, complete with a tiny, vibrant green lawn. And sitting proudly on its miniature lawn, perfectly placed and unsettlingly familiar, were a dozen tiny porcelain garden gnomes, their painted smiles too wide, their eyes fixed on the miniature house with an unsettling, patient intensity. The package also contained a single small, perfectly healthy, bright green blade of grass, vibrant and strangely vital, tied with a thin, blood-red ribbon. On the ribbon, a single, elegant script, like a silent whisper, was embroidered. "Welcome to your new home. The earth remembers." The covenant, Sarah realized with a final chilling certainty, was never broken. It had simply found a new garden,